Thanks everybody for coming. This is actually a really impressive turnout, especially since they announced that I was speaking. I would have thought that there'd be much fewer people here after seeing that. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Peter Fecci. I'm the relatively new chair of neurosurgery at University of Colorado. I am a growingly avid user of the Omniscient platform. So, all right, can everybody still hear over here pretty well? In the corners too? All right? Yeah. Sorry, you're going to actually have to listen. Apologize. Okay. So welcome everybody to San Antonio and to the 2026 Connectomics Circle Summit. It's really wow, it got really quiet there. That was great. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. Again, I think it was loud for a second. So for those of you again that don't know me, my name is Peter Fecci, the chair of neurosurgery at University of Colorado, which is now the best neurosurgery program in the country. In case you didn't know that, I'm sorry to everybody else here, but thank you. This is a great opportunity. So I've been, there are much more experienced users of Omniscient in this room than me. And some of those people will get to talk to you tonight, and they have a lot more to offer to you than I do. I'm really just an MC, if you will. But what I will say is that I have really enjoyed the technology. We started using it upon my arrival at Colorado. And I think, in the same way that navigation was a major advance to the types of surgery we can do safely, so is this, right? So rather than just relying on even DTI and directionality of fibers, now we're starting to think more about AI-guided predictions for functional networks, right? And it's just another level of safety and precision in the surgeries that we do. And there's nothing controversial about this, right? This is not something that is this beta-tested technology of, oh, gee, I wonder if this really matters, or I wonder if this is important. No, this is the standard of care that we all expected from neurosurgery now and in the future. It's just that it took us a little while to get here. And there's nothing controversial about finding a way to do our surgeries safer, to plot a trajectory down to something that's safer, and to preserving functional status in our patients. So I think this is a fantastic platform. I imagine many in the room here have used it, and I also imagine that many in the room have not, and are here, of course, to learn more about it. I can assure you that it's fantastic. Our theme tonight is Embrace the Journey of Evolution, Shape the Future of Healthcare. Evolution is typically a slow process. This has not been, right? This has been a really fast evolution of this technology in the neurosurgical space. And I think as evidence of this, there's standing room only at this event tonight because people are really interested in seeing this technology and what it has to offer you as a surgeon and to our patients. This is not a future technology anymore. This is the here and now. And this is really, like I said, the standard of care that's evolving in neurosurgery. This right here is a community, right? So a lot of you have come here to learn more about this, but you're also here not to just learn about this technology, but for those of you that have used it before, you've come to share your experience with others. And the way that we're going to improve neurosurgery is by creating these types of communities that share information, think about technology, show our colleagues and our friends how to use it, invite them to come and see us use it. And this is that leading edge, that kind of leading edge of the sword of technology. I really am excited to be able to share my experiences, and I know the folks here are excited to share theirs with you. They're all very approachable people, except for Randy D'Amico. He's kind of a jerk, but the rest of them are pretty nice, and you can approach them, and they'll tell you what they have to tell you. So this community, again, Connectomics Circle. I'll say that they're trying to not use the word omniscient. They're trying to make this more about what the technology is, not what the name branding is. This is meant to be a community. It's not to be about branding. It's about to be improving. It's about to be improving neurosurgery. So you all now are at that leading edge of neurosurgery, right? And so at this point, it's not about learning workflows or learning maps or learning functional networks. It's really about drawing those functional networks for others. I think that those of you that know me would say that at times I've been, sometimes, at the leading edge of some things. And the reason I've done that is because we all have a chance now to shape how neurosurgery evolves into the future. And you get to change the way neurosurgery is done if you're here and you're thinking about this over the next 5 to 10 years. That's really a privilege. right? Many people are followers. Many people are learning from others. People in this room tonight are starting to think about how to change neurosurgery and how to share that with others. So I think that's really an honor and a privilege that I take very seriously, and I hope that you guys will too. So tonight, again, you're going to hear from a lot of the architects of this platform, as well as of kind of using functional networks to guide surgery. I think they have fantastic things to share with you tonight. It'll be my honor to introduce them and kind of bring them to you in kind of neurosurgery space. Think about these things not just as presentations, but as kind of blueprints for what the future of neurosurgery looks like. We are moving away from this kind of general concept of neurosurgery and craniotomy and more into this area of personalized precision medicine, AI algorithms looking at people's functional networks, telling us how we should do surgery in this particular individual based on what resting state fMRI is telling us about their networks. I don't like to read from scripts, in case you couldn't tell, so I'm just using this as a thing, and I've lost my place already, so it doesn't really matter. But, so, with that being said, rather than try to find my place, I'll shut up and we'll move forward. The one thing I'll say is there's a lot of exciting things to talk about tonight. With this in mind, with this notion of kind of starting to emerge innovation in neurosurgery, I want to kick this off by bringing up the Emerging Innovator Award and bringing up the recipients of those. So this is an award that these guys have sponsored here that supports those conducting cutting-edge research in connectomic analysis and brain imaging. They fund projects that advance neuroscience and novel clinical applications for connectomic analysis. And so now I'd like to begin by announcing the winners of the 2026 Emerging Innovator Award. This is mostly focused on trainees, so the folks that you'll meet tonight, those of them that are here are trainees that have really started to push the field forward. Really proud of you guys for all the work that you're doing. It's an honor to be here with you tonight and to give you a chance to stand up on the stage and receive the award. So with that, the first of these is Eric Kuhns. So he's an incoming third-year medical student at Florida International University and Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine. And the title of his project was The Connectomic Changes Secondary to Anterior Skull-Based Tumors. Is Eric here? There he is. Sorry, man, I think you have to take a picture. Sounds good. Congratulations. Thank you so much. All right. Our second award for the evening, Victor Lopez, PGY3 at Emory University, longitudinal connectomic correlates of cognitive recovery following surgery and adjuvant therapy in adult patients with glioma. That's a mouthful. All right. Congratulations. Get this, we'll get the picture here. Yeah, big smile. Thank you. All right. Unfortunately, the other three recipients were apparently on call, strangely. I didn't think that was a thing anymore, particularly for the PGY1s. But anyway, Nick D'Addario, PGY1, Columbia University, transcranial magnetic stimulation for motor recovery following brain tumor resection and associated connectomic changes. Olivia Gilbert, who's a PGY4 at UNC, connectomic guided stereotactic radiosurgery, a feasibility study of patient-specific brain network preservation in primary and metastatic brain tumors. And lastly, but certainly not least, Abdul Al-Salama, University of Illinois, Chicago, Beyond the Infarct, using network integrity to optimize stroke prognosis and precision rehabilitation strategies. So congratulations to all our 2026 award winners for the Emerging Innovator Award, and to the two folks that were here, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's really an honor to be able to deliver these awards to you folks. So how about a round of applause for these guys? Okay, we are a full 6 minutes behind schedule, so this will now end at 1:06 in the morning. So start eating now. Okay, an update on the WNS-CNS Joint Tumor Section Emerging Technology Traveling Fellowship. So there is such a thing. And for that, I'm going to bring up Raj Mukherjee, MD, MPH from Johns Hopkins. Just a brief background on Raj as he comes up. Keep coming, don't wait for me. Raj is an associate professor of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. He serves as the director of neurosurgical oncology at Johns Hopkins Bayview Medical Center, and he's the director of both meningioma and metastatic brain tumor centers at Hopkins. It's quite the list. So I'll allow you to come on up and present the Emerging Technology Travel Fellowship. So good to see you.
I literally had 4 slides. So, there's obviously a need for us to connect and try to push the field forward. There's lots of new technologies, different fluorescent dyes, obviously Connectomics, and different functional and anatomic, processes that we're trying to integrate into the operating room. I think, Omniscient and Connectomics is obviously something that we're all interested in. When it comes to the process of our traveling fellowship, the idea was to start small and to grow. So last year there were 3 sites that were chosen. So it was Johns Hopkins, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and University of Virginia. We had 27 applicants from around the world, including, I believe it was 7 from India, 6 from USA, 4 from Afghanistan, interestingly, and then others from across the world. It was a very competitive process. We had about 12 people on our selection committee, which was the subcommittee on clinical trials and registries within the tumor section, and there were folks from all across the country, academic medical centers, and even private practice from all over the country. And we selected two winners. So the first is, and they're each going to speak to us tonight. So the first is Jeff Nadel. He's from the University of Utah. He went to University of Michigan for medical school. He's at Utah for residency, and we're going to be finding out in the next few weeks where he's going to be going for his first attending role. He spent a week with us at Johns Hopkins. He did some training with the Omniscient group, and honestly, it was a complete joy to have him in the operating room. It was a very unique experience to be able to have a chief resident from a different institution, giving us tips and tricks, and vice versa. Kareem Ahmed is a resident with me at Johns Hopkins. He's a gifted surgeon, and he spent a week at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center with Kostas Hadjipanayas and the group there. He'll be doing a skull-based fellowship with Sean Raza, and I think both have very innovative thoughts that I think they're going to share with us, including some things that they learned in their week at each institution. So with that being said, Jeff, if you don't mind sharing your thoughts, he has a handful of slides, which hopefully will go better than mine, my God. And then Kareem will come up. So thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. My name's Jeff Nadel. I'm one of the PGY7s at the University of Utah. Hey, Gary, how do I actually get the slides up? Does this work here? That looks like it's going to work. Wonderful. Just a little bit of background, which Dr. Mukherjee, very kindly went through. This was a remarkable opportunity, I felt like, for me to have a chance to get out of the place that I had spent the majority of my training, which was the University of Utah, and have a chance to be exposed to a wonderful group of people who do excellent work and were kind enough to be willing to train me in how they do it. A little bit about the Emerging Technologies Traveling Fellowship. It was initially created essentially to support early career tumor surgeons in building academic connections across geography and across disciplines. And so for someone like me, who in particular has an interest in neurosurgical oncology, but also the way that we are able to deploy neurosurgical technologies into folks who don't have access to them across places like where I live in the Intermountain West. It was a unique opportunity to go and to see how large, high-volume centers on the East Coast do this. As Dr. Mukherjee mentioned, I was at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and the majority of my time, which I'll go through a little bit about what I did, was spent with both operative and clinic observation, spent time in meetings and tumor boards, had mentorship engagements, and also had the chance to do a lot of cross-institutional networking, and I'll talk a little bit about what I did there. And it was kindly supported by Omniscient as well as the Joint Section on Tumors, and I'm very grateful to everyone for allowing me the chance to do that. Just a week at the week that I had there at a glance, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the point was each day that I was there consisted of many different activities, and some of that was the chance to present at grand rounds and sit through morning resident conference, attend tumor boards, undergo trainings, as well as operative immersion, and to be able to be in the operating room for a variety of cases across the neurosurgical spectrum, not actually just tumors, but also to see emerging technologies in other disciplines too, such as spine surgery. I had the chance to meet much of the faculty one-on-one and in small groups while I was there, and to befriend many of the residents, and I'm really grateful for those relationships, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But just as a few of the major highlights, I had the chance to deliver a short grand rounds talk while I was there, to share some of my academic work, which has been on trying to address geographic disparities in access to neuro-oncological care in the Intermountain West using an AI machine learning enabled multi-state referral system. So that was a project that I've worked on over time, which I thought had a chance to coalesce well with the goal of the fellowship, which was emerging technologies. Had the chance to attend a neuro-oncology lab meeting in the Hunterian lab, Dr. Brem's lab, which was a really unique experience for someone like me who's really more on the public health and policy side to see what a high-functioning academic research lab looks like. Certainly the operative immersion was an enormous highlight of the trip, and I learned a great deal, many of the pearls I've brought back to the way that I've been thinking about clinical cases in the rest of my fellowship this year, and then as well as I start practice next year. Just a few of those. These are a couple of pictures of me in a spine room, actually. Dr. Witham, Tim Witham at Hopkins, uses augmented reality as a way of planning osteotomies, placing instrumentation, visualization, and planning of cases. It was something I'd never seen before. It was interesting, in my mind, a relatively novel use of an emerging technology in the neurosurgical space. Certainly, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but incorporation of connectomics and tractography and the opportunity to get trained on the QuickTome software through Omniscient while I was there, I'd never had a chance to see that, and that was really unique. And then what I think I valued most of all, actually, was getting to, like anyone who does a fellowship somewhere different than where they trained in residency, the chance to get exposed to techniques that maybe we use, but in different ways, different protocols, standard of care, but deployed in a different way. So that includes everything from ultrasound to motor mapping, standard neuronavigation, MRI. And just real quickly, since this is apropos of what we're talking about in this session here, it was unique for me really to get the chance to be trained on the QuickTome software while I was at Hopkins, and we had a couple of different sessions during my week there. I certainly had been exposed to the idea of tractography throughout my training as a standard of care for performing resection surgery and neurosurgical oncology, but really the idea of incorporating functional mapping off of resting state MRI is a really interesting idea. And as Dr. Fecci had alluded to at the start, I think any type of a technology that we can use to be able to make our surgery safer and more effective is really important that we're thinking about incorporating. And so certainly at Hopkins, what I learned was it's used for everything from preoperative planning of tractography and networks to being able to actually deploy that in the neuronavigation systems and helping, during resections to be able to see what safe corridors are and how you're able to maintain safety of patients. So it was a really neat aspect of my time there. Beyond that, Hopkins is an amazingly historical place for the history of medicine and the history of neurosurgery. And I really, as a guy who's always been interested in history, I loved the chance to see, some of the major sites that have shaped what all of us do in medicine, which is try to take care of patients in the safest, most effective way. It was certainly fun also to see Harvey Cushing and Walter Dandy's former operating rooms that now have a 3D printer right in front of them and are filled with a bunch of storage equipment. It was kind of very interesting that's the case, but it was fun to see that. And then the last piece that I just wanted to highlight was the relationship building. And I learned a great deal from the people that I spent time with there, and that was definitely the most valuable part of this fellowship for me. It was the chance to network on a career level with people who have done amazing work in the neurosurgical field. It was a chance also for me to be able to leverage Johns Hopkins as an institution, but also the greater Washington, D.C. area as a way to meet people who have similar interests to me and to try to find ways that we could collaborate into the future. And that meant having the chance to connect with everyone from the scientific vice president of the American Cancer Society to leaders within the institution, and actually to start research projects and collaboratively plan grants that are ongoing right now. And so that was a tremendous opportunity that the fellowship afforded. And certainly I made friends too, and it was great to spend time with the residents. And I am really grateful to Kareem and all of your colleagues there for taking me in for the week and showing me around. My big takeaways, and I've hinted at this throughout the talk so far, but I just wanted to highlight 4. The first one is that what I learned at Hopkins was that technology really flourishes in innovative environments. And that sounds really easy to say, but every emerging technology that I witnessed while I was there, whether it was AR in spine or Connectomics, translational therapeutics in the lab, all of those things require an institutional culture of creativity, of exploration, of willingness to push boundaries. It's really, really important to have created a culture that fosters that type of inquiry. And to me, it's more than just the tools themselves, it's the environment that you place the tools in. And I saw that firsthand there, and I was grateful for that. The second is that multidisciplinary science tackles very complex problems, and it has to be structurally built that way. And what I mean by that is that you have to, in order to be able to tackle complex societal problems, whether that's curing GBM or it's getting access to care for patients in remote areas across the world, you have to actually build that into the structural fabric of what you do. So you have to co-locate diverse perspectives in the same place so that they can talk to each other and they can see each other every day. And then that fosters collaboration. If you simply have all the resources at an institution, but they're siloed and they're separate, that cross-pollination doesn't happen. And I saw that up close and personal there, and it was one great takeaway I have for my future career, is wanting to make sure that as we try to tackle intractable problems in our society, you really need to be able to have different perspectives altogether. Number 3, and this is no surprise to every surgeon in the room, surgical mentorship is irreplaceable. Certainly having the opportunity to see how different people do the same thing is invaluable. And I'm really grateful for the chance to have been able to scrub into the OR and have that opportunity there. And finally, connections and relationships are really the foundation of being able to have progress in medicine. And the relationships that I built there, both in the neurosurgical department, but also more broadly across the Hopkins institution, really has afforded me the chance to continue that work into the future. And so it's certainly, I've highlighted most of these points already, so I won't belabor them, but this fellowship had a great impact on my career, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful to the folks in this room, and certainly Dr. Mukherjee for your mentorship and your willingness to host me for the time there. I learned a great deal, as I said, about innovation and inquiry and implementation, driving impact, about how to actually incorporate new technologies into the operating room, and then certainly academic bridges and being able to sustain those over time. As I mentioned, I'm even in the process of co-writing a grant with one of the faculty at Hopkins right now to continue some of the work we had talked about while I was there moving forward. So those friendships and relationships are what make life worth living in my mind, and so it was really great to be able to build that while I was there. And so not all of my pictures, it looks like, showed up on this slide either, but all of the words at least did. And so I just want to thank, as I mentioned, Dr. Mukherjee and the whole faculty, the leadership, the staff, and the residents at Hopkins for welcoming me for the week. It was delightful. I have really great memories of it, and I'll never forget them. Certainly my mentors at the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Utah, Dr. Jensen being one of the great ones here. I'm really grateful for the chance to for you all putting this on my radar, that this fellowship existed, and to be able to have applied for it. And then certainly Omniscient, Gary, you've been a great partner, and I'm really grateful for all the learning you've given me this year in the Joint Section on Tumors for enabling this. So thank you all so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Kareem Ahmed. I'm one of the PGY6 residence at Hopkins, where I'm doing my chief residency year. And I'm going to talk about my time with Dr. Hajipanias at Pittsburgh. Again, very fortunate to have received this award with Jeff here, who just spoke. So I did my Emerging Traveling Fellowship time at UPMC with Dr. Hajipanias. And, it was first and foremost an amazing clinical experience. I mean, really seamless integration of use of the exoscope, fluorescence-guided resection, connectomics, intraoperative confocal microscopy, which it wasn't even on my radar until I had seen Dr. Hajipanias doing that. And first and foremost, really just amazing surgical expertise. During my time there, we saw extraaxial tumors, intrinsic tumors. I as an emerging technologies grant, I became interested in this. Really, Dr. Hajipanias is one of the pioneers of 5-ALA in the U.S. So, as a historical background, the first case was in 1998, and it didn't get FDA approved until June 2017. And this audience knows very well the benefits of fluorescence-guided resection with enhanced visualization of tumor cells, extensive resection, and benefit to progression-free survival. So 5-ALA at Hopkins has been a relatively recent adoption, really under the leadership of Dr. Mukherjee, and I had the opportunity to work with him in getting that protocol approved at Hopkins. This is just a picture of the first 5-ALA case. In spending my time with Dr. Hajipanias, we saw a lot of cases and a lot of gamma knife, which I'll talk about, but really what was very appealing was talking to him about his research efforts. I met with his research group extensively, and we talked about the clinical trial protocols he has going on. One of the most exciting was photodynamic therapy, which we spoke about. And so PDT and 5-ALA and talaporphin sodium is essentially laser emitted at different wavelengths. So at 5-ALA, it's at 635 nanometers, and at TS, it's at 664. And that excitation of the laser intraoperatively causes reactive oxygen species that disrupts tumor growth, and they have an ongoing clinical trial in that. So as someone who's interested in clinical trials myself, that intraoperative implementation of PDT was very appealing to learn about. This is, again, just a meta-analysis from their group showing increased progression-free survival and a 25% increase in one-year survival. Of course, a lot of the time was spent at Gamma Knife with Dr. Hajipanias being really the eminent Gamma Knife program. Two very recent papers that came out of his group in some very challenging neurosurgical diseases, craniopharyngioma and cavernous meningioma, and we saw a lot of these cases. One unique thing was the Gamma Knife conference, which I got to observe and participate in, and I had never seen anything like that, where they discussed about 40 cases, very challenging Gamma Knife cases, and was able to learn both academically and clinically tremendously from that experience. This is from their paper for Gamma Knife for craniopharyngiomas with good long-term control, and for cavernous meningiomas with good control and neurologic outcomes. In terms of next steps, for me, I work closely with Dr. Mukherjee, who's a very close friend and role model for me, and we're looking at supratotal resection and implementation of connectomics, and we get QuickTome pretty routinely for all of our intrinsic tumors. This is a brief diagram of some of the radiomics work that we've been performing in Dr. Mukherjee's group, and really trying to focus on quality of life metrics with radiomics and supratotal resection. I want to thank the Omniscient group for putting this together. It was really an incredible learning experience for me. Dr. Hajipanias, who's been a fantastic mentor. Dr. Mukherjee, of course, who is a role model to me, and Jeff, my co-fellow, who just beautifully spoke, and we got time to spend together at Hopkins and have been friends since then. So thank you.
Thank you both. Those were fantastic talks, and I think it's important to highlight, what a great job the Omniscient Group has done in finding ways to fund educational opportunities for our trainees across the country and bring mentorship experiences to them, particularly within the arena of connectomics, but just in general. I don't think that these types of traveling fellowships are really prevalent in our field kind of regardless. So this is really a great opportunity. On the heels of that, I think some more talks now on basically the use of connectomics in the operating room. And we'll start with a talk by Randy D'Amico. So the title of this talk is The Surgeon Executive Alliance in Navigating Administration to Advanced Surgical Technology Adoption. So those of you who don't know Randy, he's an associate professor of neurosurgery at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell, where he specializes in surgical neuro-oncology and directs the brain and spine metastasis program at Lenox Hill. He's been actually a good friend and mentor to me in a lot of these technologies over time. I really appreciate his insights into things. And his work really does sit at the intersection of brain tumor surgery, connectomics, and emerging technologies, with a focus on understanding and preserving the brain as a network. I think you'll really like a lot of things he has to say. I've always been impressed by his talks and his thoughtful approach to brain tumor neurosurgery. So, thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Do you guys see my pictures? All right, good. Real quick, how many people here are within their first 5 years of practice? You got some hands? All right. How many people here are looking for jobs and getting a job next year? Some people. By the way, Peter's a new chair. Find him afterwards. Yeah. So even though I do a lot of work with the actual data that Omniscient provides, or just connectomic research in general, and how I do it with brain tumor surgery, I was kind of asked to talk about how you bring this into a program. So I think it's going to be a little bit more relevant to those people who are looking for jobs, who have just started a job and maybe are looking to carve out a niche. And this is a very young field that has a lot of opportunity if you wanted to make it your niche. And there's a lot of work to be done. And scientifically, there's a lot of work that's already been done. And that's a really important thing. This has been around for 20 plus years. It's just now that there's a commercially available tool to do it, it offers the ability for, really not that smart people like neurosurgeons to get involved and start doing what they need to do. So this is a very practical talk. This is, I have an idea, I work for a system, and I need to get that idea through, and I want this. So basically working to make this from an idea to a pilot to standard of care. And you have to realize that most innovation that you're going to see in the exhibit hall, most innovation you're going to hear about tonight, this doesn't fail in the operating room. This stuff is worked out, it's vetted. This stuff fails in a conference room, and you're not in that conference room. So you have to understand how this all works. So the reality of a hospital system is that hospitals are optimized for risk minimization, financial predictability, operational stability. Anything new that you bring to your boss is a threat until proven otherwise. And the most important thing is no one gets fired for saying no. You get fired when you make big mistakes. And this is how you need to just think about this when you're coming to your chair like Peter and saying, hey, I'm going to spend a lot of money on something, all right? And I need you to do it. Let's see. So why do most innovation, technological solutions fail? It's really cool technology with no problem. This is something I fall into constantly with my work in augmented reality. It's super cool. It's the future. What's the problem? We all are able to do surgery regularly. And this is the problem when you go to your senior partners and you say, look, I've got a new way to map the brain. And they're going to say, well, I mapped the brain. We went to a 12-hour course today about mapping the brain. And they've done it the same way for a very long time. So that's one major way. There's no financial narrative. No one has decided how this is going to make money for things. There's no integration plan. There's no executive sponsor, which when you work for a big system, which at this point we all work for big systems, you need. You need political capital. You need social capital in this. And then measurable outcomes. If you can't tell your administrator how this is going to affect length of stay, complications, or your market share, you have no proposal. And you need to know that going into this. So Connectomics, as an idea, what's our problem, all right? We are very bad at predicting functional outcomes after glioma surgery. With all the technologies that we have, we are not good at it. And the decisions that we need to make are extremely subjective when you get to the most important part. And so that's a real problem when we're talking about patient care. And the solution here, as everyone's going to reiterate, I promise you after this, is patient-tailored solutions. This is patient-specific network mapping, and the promise here is we're going to get this better oncofunctional balance. People are going to do better. And so that's how this kind of solves it, and that's kind of the premise that you need to keep in your mind when you're going to your administrators, when you're going to these people about this. Before you go any further, you need to figure out what the decision structure is. If you don't know where your decision is going to live, you're just pitching ideas into the void. So you need to really map this out. Who is the person that needs to say yes? Is it your hospital leadership? Is it your service line? Is it a system committee? Is it the procurement group, right? Procurement is not just a neutral entity. They are a cost containment function of your hospital. So it's pivotal that you get these people on your side. Where does this decision live? Where are you taking your idea to? And then where does that money sit? Who controls the budget? Is it the department? Is it the system? Is it the individual hospital? You have to understand this stuff. You have to follow the money early. So what is the funding pathway? How is this going to get paid for? This kind of makes sense. I think the most important part of this slide is if it's not clear within your department, grants, pilot funding, like our group here in the front, all right, who just won, congratulations, by the way, or industry partnerships. Industry understands this from their end of things. They should be willing to partner with you to get things through, at least for a pilot. And then your business model matters. Is this a subscription service? Where is it housed? Is it capital purchase? That's going to trigger different kind of workflows. And again, mapping that out in advance helps you succeed without a doubt. And if it doesn't, just get out. It's a gate. It's just going to stop you. So you really need to understand this. All right, you need to define the institutional problem. Now you get into the real area of where you can be an expert. Instead of saying we can map networks, because no one cares, right? You need to say we can reduce permanent neurologic deficits. And I promise, we have data that supports that. I'm not allowed to talk about it today, but we have it. Shoaib in the back there and Zoe have put it together. I was just reading the abstract on the way here. That will be published at some point soon. We can differentiate our tumor program in a competitive market, right? Like I said, this is your opportunity to carve out a niche in something that is going to be a big deal and is not yet. There is a ton of opportunity sitting here. We can create a data asset for precision neurosurgery. This is also big, and I wanted to put it on here, but I think we have probably, 4 or 5 publications in this space in this year, maybe more than that. There is an opportunity here to really hone what we're doing, take it to the next level, and build on the people who have built this before us. So there's a real big opportunity. And then you got to translate it to an administrator, which is clinical outcomes, financial impact, strategic value. That's it. And the number one thing is actually financial impact. Clinical outcomes are amazing. We all are in this for that reason, but financial impact is the most important thing when you're talking to a hospital. You need this alliance with the surgeon and the executive. You need a physician sponsor. If you are not the chair, you need to go to your chair. They need to believe in you, and they need to show that, all right? If you are the chair, then you need to go to one of the younger people who can actually put in the work and make this a reality. You need that kind of executive partnership going on. You need an administrative insider. You need someone who knows this system so that you can map this out and before. And then just boots on the ground, you need an operational owner. Is this going to be in radiology? Is it OR leadership? It kind of depends on what you're doing, but these are important components. The physician partner, your chairman or your senior tumor partner, is the person who's in the room when you're not. And that is a very important position to be in because they continue this conversation when you're not there, and there are tons of conversations that happen when you are not there. So super important. Always start as a pilot, not as a program. If you have to build infrastructure, this is going to fail immediately. People are going to say no immediately. And so this slide kind of speaks for itself, but the bottom line is you start small, be very specific about what you want to do, because then it's easier to show success, and you got to be smart about that. You want to integrate into the workflow. Who's going to order this? Where is it done? Who processes it? With QuickTome, this is easy. It's ordered at the time of MRI. You're processing everything pre-op. You're integrating it into your navigation. It lives in a cloud. It's de-identified. But IT is going to want to know this. IT, with everything going on with AI, your biggest hurdle is probably going to be IT, no matter what. And so you need to, again, understand this stuff all early on and have conversations with your reps, whoever's bringing in the technology, because they've gone through this at institutions. This is in place. You're not reinventing the wheel anywhere. And then what does your success look like? Is it actually our center of resection got better? Probably not. Is it functional preservation? That's a big deal. Again, admin's not going to care so much, but you can at least show them data, right? Is it time added to the workflow? Not really. Is it strategy? We have referrals coming in for this purpose. People in the community have heard we're doing this. You need to really define that early on and understand what you're going to tell your boss this was a success or not, like how you're going to argue that. And then tell the story. My senior partner is a very vocal individual about his successes, and it's something that I've learned from him. You don't want to be too humble. You want to tell people you're good without telling people you're good, right? And there's a line to draw there. And people who know him know what I'm saying. You want to show 2 or 3 compelling cases, before and after framing. You really want this to understand, you want people to understand that the outcome changed because of what you did. And you have to be vocal about that because this is your project. If you really want this in there, you're going to want to tell people about it. And the way we do this with my group, and again, there a lot of them are sitting here, is we publish on it. And if Northwell sends out an email, peer publications in the news kind of thing, once a month, and we are in it every single month. And it's every single month like clockwork. My name is in there, and my team's name is in there, and that's how you get that stuff done. And so, again, we're not talking about any data here. This is really just a practical kind of conversation about how to understand the framework. The people who understand admin, you dominate your department because you understand how to make things actually happen. You become an architect, and you need to just build a system that's going to allow you to bring cool stuff in like this. And so I'm excited to hear the rest of the talks. I appreciate you guys listening. I know it's a little bit off topic, but I think it's useful. So thank you. I don't know where your thing was.
Slides. Yeah. Thanks, Randy. That was great. And I think actually it's really important to take a couple of those points home, which is you will have to sell a technology like this or any technology that's new in your institution to the administration. And I can say from our own experiences that a lot of it was based on improving the safety of surgery, right? Because it's functional avoidance. And honestly, a lot of places that are building, much in the way that we are interested in having things that others don't, a competitive advantage. And that will play more than you think. But I think the really key thing here is this is the state of the art of neurosurgery. And if a place is interested in building a program, you need to have the technology that allows neurosurgery to be advanced, be safe, et cetera. And that will sell more than you think it might otherwise to your administration. When it comes to defining success, Randy couldn't say certain things about his partners, and I just want to say that sometimes success looks like a TikTok dance, and you just, sometimes it is, right? And you can't be too humble, like you said, right? So anyway, in any event, I do think there are a couple other key points here. So first off, Randy talked a little bit about the chance to shape a technology. There aren't going to be that many opportunities across your career to do that. And I think I've been fortunate to have that opportunity once or twice. Some in the room here have had that opportunity multiple times. I think, for those of you who don't know him, we have literally one of the most famous glioma surgeons in the country, and Alan Friedman here tonight. And he has had the chance to shape 1,000 things across his career and has done it with a great amount of pride and also of real humility. And he should be a hero to everybody in this room. And I think that when we think what you all in the room can do, this is a chance, like there are opportunities to publish on this. There are opportunities to think about how we should use this technology. Those types of decisions, the chance to influence that, not a lot of people get the chance to change the way neurosurgery is practiced. And I think when you look at even just the smallest opportunity to think that neurosurgery is different in 5 years because of something you did, that's really pretty awesome. And it's as simple as publishing your experience with some of these things and deciding where and how it's best used. So take that to heart because I do think that's an important point. And Randy said it eloquently, but I think it deserves re-emphasis in a way. So with that, I will move to the next stage. And so our next speaker is Mike Ivan from Miami. Again, for those of you that don't know Mike, he's a professor of neurosurgery at the University of Miami, serving as the director of research for the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center and Brain Tumor Initiative. And he's the director of skull-based surgery and co-director of skull-based surgery fellowship at Miami. He also is, I think, a perennial early adopter of technologies, not just with the idea to have something cool, but because he really is thoughtful about and shapes the way those are employed in our field. And I think he is another one of the people that I really respect in our field, and I think you'll really enjoy what he has to say as well. So, Mike.
Great, thanks. I didn't get the updated agenda apparently, so glad to be up here. I'm going to invite actually my team up here because we're going to split this talk up. I figured by now, you wouldn't want to listen to me talk for 15 minutes straight. So we're going to split it up to really the brains behind some of the work that we're doing. So I'll kind of give us the introduction here once I get the talk. Okay, yeah, so you're going to get more than just, for Dr. Kuntz, where was he? A little bit of behind the scenes of what we could do for skull-based tumors. We're going to talk a little bit more about, I think you'll hear later about how we could use connectomics for guiding surgery, for avoiding cognitive deficits. But we're going to pull the curtain behind about a little bit more of the analysis that we could do with this technology when you get the resting state fMRI. What does that mean, and what can you start to interpret on some of these patients to understand preoperatively and postoperatively how their cognition may be changing, how it is changing, and maybe what the future may hold for using this technology in schwannomas, gliomas, and epilepsy. So. Yeah, okay, great. So, so I'm going to talk, and then we'll have some of my team talk. So when we started looking at cases that were beyond intrinsic tumors, most of my cases these days, I've really transitioned more into skull-based, have been extraaxial tumors. And so, with these tumors, you don't touch the brain, right? A lot of these tumors are outside. So my question are we affecting the connectome when we do these resections? And specifically, a little passion of mine is vestibular schwannomas. And we have these difficult cases of hearing loss and balance issues, and we've been kind of trying to come up with a lot of novel ideas of how to monitor these patients and look at if we could predict how people will recover from this, and how they will deal with some of these deficits after surgeries. And so, this is a typical patient here with a 65-year-old with some worsening hearing on the left side who comes to you. And, we wanted to look at first of what these networks look like preoperatively and how they change postoperatively. And we're going to get into a little bit of the methods behind this, but basically when we look at the resting state and how the connections are happening, on the left here, we have kind of the correlation analysis, and on the right we have anomalies. So these diamonds, on the left side of the diamond is a pre-op of every connection within each network, and on the right side is post-op. And then the correlation view is kind of how things are correlated within the tumor. Anomalies is based on the normal 2000 brains that we get from the software system and how we can compare this patient to what it should be, and gives us kind of data, which is really exciting to kind of analyze and to interpret and think about. And so what was interesting, first of all, in this patient is this is an extraaxial tumor in the infratentorial space, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of anomalies and changes in the connectome when there's no real edema, there's no intraaxial tumor, but we know that this patient has some sensory changes because they have hearing loss at baseline. And then postoperatively, we see that kind of gets worse. And what's interestingly is that if we look at where the dominant kind of anomalies are in this patient, we could see that we're seeing language, dorsal intention network, things that correlate with hearing loss in these actual networks that are there even before we touch the patient and then kind of get worse after we touch the patient, almost leading to the fact that there's a signature within the connectome that we could predict this patient has hearing loss if we just don't even see the patient, we just look at their resting state. And then we could actually kind of look at their resting state postoperatively and understand, does this patient get better or get worse, without even getting an audiogram of the patient and seeing how they're doing, which I think is kind of really impressive of the software and its interpretation. And in fact, when we look postoperatively at where the standard deviation of more than threefold is increased in which parcellations are affected, we see again that most of those are areas of language, auditory function, visual, and social interaction, which is where this patient lost hearing postoperatively, and again kind of emphasizes that we can pick up these changes that are happening. They're not me resecting the brain. Like I didn't resect this network or remove this network. It's actually the fact that we remove kind of the sensory nerve, but yet that's affecting the overall cognition and the connectome of the brain, which I thought was kind of really exciting. So we're kind of diving into this in different ways, and to kind of come up with this methodology, Vraco, who's our research, head of our research clinical program, and then Richa, who's a research fellow from Rutgers coming, is going to talk a little bit about how we do this analysis and what we found in some other etiologies. Don't be afraid of Vraco and his English accent, because he's not even from England, but he's really provides a lot of insight into and spent many, many hours thinking about this, so thanks.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ivan, and thanks again for the opportunity. So my name is Ratko, one of the postdoc fellows. I'd like to just take a little bit of a step back. There's people here in this room who've done loads and loads of research on this, and there's people who have no clue what those diamonds are. So I think if we go through it in a methodology way, I think it will encourage a lot of collaboration, especially with the multi-center GCP trial that we're working on. And I'd just like to pose 3 of the key questions that we now think every time we think of a research problem with QuickTerm. There's 3 key questions we like to answer. And we use the DTI and resting state fMRI data predominantly from that right-hand side, which is the functional view. There's also data from the left-hand side, which is the DTI count, but today we'll focus on the functional data. So there's 3 key questions. First of all, is connectivity changing? If it is changing, how is it changing? Is it getting stronger and weaker? And what does it mean for a connection to get stronger and weaker? Clinically or just on the Excel spreadsheet. There's 2 very different things. So how do we define that to make it clinically meaningful when we publish a paper on that topic? And thirdly, are these changes anomalous? Are these significantly different? How do we clinically interpret them instead of just saying it's more or less? What does that mean in the context of skull-based neuro-oncology and lobectomies for epilepsy patients? So the first question is something that Dr. D'Amico mentioned. This has been, Connectomics before QuickTerm, this idea of FC analysis has been around way before neurosurgeons dug their teeth into it. And essentially, it's a pretty simple concept that 2 parts of the brain are either firing perfectly in concert and they're bright red, they're +1, or they're perfectly anti-correlated, they're bright blue, they're -1. And it's never really quite that case. It's a spectrum of connectivity. And on the left-hand side, you see an example of a language network from one of our patients. And so you can take this raw data that QuickTerm gives you from the website. You can look at pre and post-op, and the real power is you can do matched analysis. So previously, you might be pooling all the data from the language network, all the data from the sensory motor network, and saying that's the signal. Well, clearly, we have positives and negatives. If we average them out, we'll get something near 0. So that's kind of meaningless. So if you do matched analysis, pre and post-op, you can actually start saying at the resolution of the individual connection, each of those small squares is an individual parcel-to-parcel connection. So that's the first question, and that's something that people in this room have been working on extensively. The second question is, how is it changing? Or what we call directionality analysis. Another way to frame this is, what is the fate of a connection between 2 time points? Because each of those little squares can do several things. It can get more extreme, it can get less extreme, or it can go from positive to negative or vice versa. And so we try to group them into 3 main different groups. Either hypercoupling, the connection gets more extreme, uncoupling, it gets less extreme, or sign switch, so positive connection becomes negative or vice versa. And this way we're trying to, on the left-hand side, you can see 4 example networks that show this. And why do we care about this? Why bother? Well, it's just another way of trying to take quite raw data and give it some sort of clinical meaning in the context of existing literature, so that we're not just firing off clinical questions without the right context. And now the third is the anomaly analysis. So this is already built into QuickTerm, and this is, I think, the most clinically relevant, if you will, because it already gives you a binary output. Compared to those 2,000 patients, healthy patients that Dr. Ivan mentioned, it's either anomalous or it isn't. And it can be either extremely overconnected or extremely underconnected or hyperconnected. And again, we can once again take the pre and post-op scan, do a pre and post-op analysis. And how do we quantify this? Well, we use a scaled measure called percentage of network disruption, because each networks are different in size. Some have 200 connections, some have 2,000. So as a percentage of disruption, you can do that pre and post-operatively and see how is this network doing, if you will, compared to a healthy reference data set. So that's enough of the methodology. We have 3 key questions, and we'll be exploring the results using this analysis in the next few slides. So is it changing? How is it changing? And are they anomalous? Going left to right, we go from the most abstract to what we argue is the least abstract, but still, it's colorful squares on the page. So let's put it into context with some patient data. Now, jumping back into skull base, it's a really nice model to see how networks change irrespective of the lesion location. If you get 10 occipital gliomas and you find that the visual networks are really disrupted, that does not mean that gliomas have a tendency to disrupt visual networks. It just so happens that the 10 patients you chose. So the nice thing about vestibuloadenoma is you can examine these preoperative deficits, and you know that you're not being biased by the location of the tumor. And so what we did in this analysis, we took 4 patients, and you might just think, oh, it's an N of 4, that's a really small number. But actually, when you combine all those parcels, it's about 44,000 individual data points just across these 4 patients. And at the preoperative level, we can compare to what extent are each of these networks disrupted. Again, these lesions are far away from the actual cortical networks physically. And we see that there is a differential disruption across different networks. And that remains true across other pathologies we looked at, including glioma and meningioma. And so you might think, why do we care? No surgery's happened yet. Why are we looking at this? Well, I think in the context of planning larger scale, multi-center collaborations, knowing what happens at baseline is incredibly important so we can control for it downstream when we carry out the analysis. And now going back into slightly perhaps more surgically relevant question is there a difference, for example, between patients who are newly diagnosed and recurrent high-grade glioma? And why is this relevant? Why do we care? Well, we might want to see whether there are compensatory differences in the hemispheres post-surgery. Because remember, the patients who have a recurrent high-grade glioma, those patients have had a lesion, a resection, chemoradiation, and then the tumor has recurred. So there's really different insults. And if we break the networks into the affected or the unaffected, maybe we could see something even more interesting. So what do we find? Perhaps unsurprisingly, patients who have recurrent high-grade gliomas have more network disruption than newly diagnosed tumors. Perhaps that's not a surprising finding, given the insult that that brain has had to undergo to get to the stage of being called a recurrent high-grade glioma. And this is maintained for hyperconnected and hypoconnected anomalies. I think I'll just close with this one slide before Richard takes over. The really interesting slide is, we think, this one, where when you group the networks into either affected or the same side as the lesion, or unaffected, the healthy hemisphere, if you will, the disease-free hemisphere, in the newly diagnosed setting, the networks on the same side of the lesion are more disrupted. But this pattern switches in the recurrent setting, and it's actually the contralateral, healthy, undiseased hemisphere that's more disrupted. And this, again, remains true across hyper and hyperconnected anomalies. And I think the two interesting takeaways, just to close, would be that there's networks that have been untouched by tumor or by resection seem to be taking on more work to compensate for the fact that a lesion has had an impact on that side. And that secondly, this idea that anomaly is always a bad thing might not be the true interpretation. That maybe actually network disruption in the case of a recurrent setting might actually be a beneficial thing. That maybe we should start seeing extreme network disruption as potentially a compensatory signal for a disease state on the other side of the brain. But what about the larger picture? What about neurocognitive deficits, and what about functional outcomes in these patients? And so I'll hand over to Richard to talk about that.
Awesome. So thank you. Now I'm going to be talking about how we can correlate cognitive diseases and cognition to functional connectomics, and how we can actually see the way that functional connectomics can relate to clinical outcomes. So this study was done looking at preoperative patients, and we looked at the default mode network, and we used an MMSE, the mini mental, as a way of deciding whether a patient was had normal cognition or impaired cognition. And we define normal cognition as an MMSE score greater than 24 and impaired cognition as below. And within this 20-patient subset of mixed cranial lesions, we saw that the contralesional side had more anomalies, as Rocco said, in patients that had normal cognition. So we can understand that as that the contralesional side, there is some compensatory measures that are happening to ensure that those patients have stable cognition. And then we also looked at the ipsilesional side in the default mode network, and we selected the default mode network specifically because that network was the most correlated with MMSE and cognition. And we saw that on the ipsilesional hemisphere, there were no significant changes. And then we wanted to see, what about comparing both of the hemispheres together? And then we found that between both of the hemispheres, the more asymmetry in the hemispheres, as in the more lesions on one side compared to the other, the worse your outcome is going to be in these patients, as in the worse it correlates with impaired cognition. And next we wanted to see, are we able to predict how patients do postoperatively based on their preoperative functional connectivity scan. So in this, we also looked at the change in MMSE from the preoperative to the postoperative scan. And we saw that patients that were in the preoperative period having fewer anomalies ended up doing better postoperatively. So in other words, patients that had more anomalies in the preoperative period ended up having a worse MMSE score postoperatively. And then we stepped back and looked at the whole brain and the total amount of anomalies in the whole brain and saw that that was a consistent pattern in the whole brain and also the contralesional hemisphere. So we said that more preoperative disruption predicts a worsening of postoperative cognition. And then now switching gears, we were talking a lot about brain tumors, and we know that Connectomics has mainly been used for brain tumors, especially the software. We tried to see how we can use the software for epilepsy surgery and Connectomics. So we looked at a 5-patient cohort that underwent lobectomy, and our first analysis looked at the directionality analysis, which Racco explained very eloquently about what the fate of each connection is postoperatively. And these fates fall between 3 different types of directions. One that is defined as uncoupling, known as the value becoming closer to 0 and the signal becoming weaker. Hypercoupling is known as the FC value becoming more extreme and either towards -1 or 1, and switch is when a negative value becomes positive or vice versa. And we saw that across the board in all of these patients, uncoupling was the most common directionality in the whole brain and each hemisphere specifically. And then we wanted to see, is this pattern consistent in each individual cortical network? And we saw in the whole brain, yes. In all of these networks, you can see that uncoupling, as in the signal becoming weaker, and a dampening of the signal in the whole brain is consistent across each network. Then we looked at each hemisphere individually and saw that the networks that contributed to this significance were different. However, combined, we can see that this is a similar pattern across the whole brain. And finally, we went back to our anomaly analysis in our epilepsy patients and saw that the total amount of anomalies, while they didn't necessarily change from the preoperative to the postoperative period, we did see that the contribution of each type of anomaly did change. So the blue represents hypoconnected anomalies, which are those abnormally disconnected connections, and the red defines the hyperconnected anomalies, which are defined as hyperactive anomalies. And we saw that the total amount of hypoconnected anomalies did increase and the hyperconnected anomalies decreased. And in the setting of these patients that underwent lobectomy, at their post-operative scan, they were all seizure-free. So this directly correlates with their clinical picture of seizure freedom and this dampening of the signal that is seen throughout the brain. And just some key takeaways from this study. Resective surgery results in this quieting of the brain and network quiescence that we see, which aligns with seizure freedom in these patients. And that's seen through both types of analysis, our directionality analysis and our anomaly analysis. And those were our key findings for our epilepsy study. And then I hope you were able to get a little insight about some of the research that we're doing at University of Miami and how we use Connectomics across the board from skull-based to neuro-oncology to epilepsy. And I want to thank Dr. Ivan and the rest of our amazing team for their great work.
I really think it's worth highlighting how strong that work is because, these are new data that we accumulate now pre and post-operatively, and the chance to essentially threshold set for what's the tolerance of certain networks for disruption and how that might correlate to functional outcome, which you're starting to see the beginnings of, is really an important clinical question, right? So how much can any of these networks tolerate from a disruption perspective? And perhaps we see disruptions that we show on data points, but that may or may not correlate to a clinical outcome. And no one in this room really knows how those two will correlate. So I think this is a really important first step in understanding that. So, Mike, I think your team are really doing great work in that, and I think it's going to be very important for understanding how to best utilize these data to predict outcome. So kudos to you all. Now, somewhere in here, if I can find it, I had let's see right here. Yep, great, okay. So our next speaker in that, and by the way, a little bit of housekeeping. I know that about 98% of the people in here have been to the bar so far. So this is probably important to note that the bathrooms are out and around to the right. I've been asked by the staff here to inform you that your seat is not a reasonable bathroom alternative. So please refrain, it's frowned upon. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Annalise Rodriguez, who's seated right here. And the title of her talk is Lessons Learned in Connectomics, Advancing Patient Outcomes, Clinical Excellence, and Health System Value. And Dr. Rodriguez is an associate professor of neurosurgery and director of neurosurgical oncology at University of Arkansas. She's a neurosurgeon scientist with an NCI-funded laboratory focused on translational genomics and precision neuro-oncology. She leads a large multidisciplinary brain tumor program integrating advanced surgical technologies, including connectomics, and minimally invasive approaches with molecular profiling to guide individualized patient care. And she is one of the really truly talented brain tumor surgeons out there. Arkansas is quite lucky to have her. I've seen her speak now at multiple conferences, and I think you'll be impressed by what Dr. Rodriguez has to offer. So come on up. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's see, make sure this. Okay, I'm going to talk about our early experience. We have been users since 2022, so this is just going back to the start of the program and thinking about how you can potentially integrate this into your own practice. Obviously, the main goal of Connectomics is to improve your oncofunctional balance. And I think that, as many of the speakers outlined today, it's more than just simple tractography, especially with some of the resting state fMRI work. And then there are various programs that can do tractography, but a lot of them don't accommodate, for example, for edema. So you may be mapping out things, and there's a lot of artifact, and the tracks drop out where there's edema. And so that can be a big problem, especially for a tumor program. And then the other thing is how you integrate this into surgical planning. And we'll talk a little bit about that through some cases and how this leads to better functional outcomes. Our first 20 cases gave us some insights. The main thing is that it helped us identify surgical candidates. And mainly what I mean by that is some people were billed as maybe this is not safe to operate on, and then you map them out and you say, oh, no, I think I can safely do a resection. And the other thing is the opposite, that you feel maybe I can take out this tumor, but then you map them out and you realize I would disrupt a lot of very important pathways that might lead to a functional status that is not compatible with what their goals, and then you may opt for not necessarily doing as aggressive of a surgery. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the financial side, because as great as this helps you with your pre-surgical planning, I think Dr. D'Amico really pointed out some things that you have to tell leadership in order for them to have a buy-in. So we'll go to some case examples. So this is some problems that you can encounter as a tumor neurosurgeon and how this platform can help you. So problem number one, awake mapping is not feasible. So this is common. A patient comes in, a large left frontal tumor or left temporal tumor, and a lot of times I think classically people think, I'm going to do an awake craniotomy. Many of you who've seen these people with large tumors know that a lot of them they have such disorganized speech pathways that they cannot participate in awake mapping. Their speech is so badly affected. And this is because this woman had a lot of edema and she would not be able to tolerate an awake surgery. And so mapping her out and doing this without an awake pathway, I think, oops, I'm not sure what happened. Okay, I think one of the cases that really helped me become more confident is I had a patient who actually only spoke Spanish, and we did not have the capability to do awake mapping in the operating room. So that was one of the first patients that I'm like, okay, I'm going to take the leap. Do I really believe in connectomics? Because I'm not going to be mapping them. And so this is another example. And then for our program, these patients, we do a next generation sequencing. So you can see that this is in a very aggressive subtype of GBM, a TORC promoter mutation, CDKN2 co-deletion. So again, this is not your run-of-the-mill GBM. This is a very nasty one. And then we also send out functional assays. So we do drug screening on ex vivo organoids. And so you can see this is her response. And so look at temozolomide, which is standard of care. Her ex vivo profile shows that there's no response in her tumor. So we actually did her asleep. She ended up having a pretty good outcome. She had improved speech because as the edema went away, she had a pretty good quality of life, lived. This is recurrence almost a year later, and she had contralateral recurrence. So for this one, we did a supraorbital approach, and then again, the same iterative pathway to try to help her live longer. But again, the index surgery is most important for overall survival, and having that confidence to actually rely on connectomics over some traditional things like awake mapping. So here's another problem that can be encountered is patient hesitancy. So this is a patient who had a young man, a primary breadwinner for his family, and he's a machinist. So his vision was very important. So he had an oligodendroglioma resected years ago. Now he has recurrence, and he's like, I'm so scared to get surgery. If it affects my vision, I can't have it. And so this is just an example of using the tool to tell the patients, no, it's going to be safe. And I do incorporate it into surgical counseling so that you can actually physically show this to the patient and say, look, this is your tumor. This is a vision pathway, or as I call them, highways to my patient. And you can safely resect this and you're not going to have a deficit, which is really important for some people. So it can address that problem as well. And then talking about recovery. So default mode network and salience network are things that on traditional mapping software you may not get insight to, but with Connectomics you do. And then you can start to see tumors that are involved in these regions and having really candid discussions with the patient and their family about, well, this is likely what you're going to be like after we take the tumor out. And for some people, they opt for just a simple biopsy, or sometimes in extreme cases, they opt for no surgery and just to let nature take over. And then another thing is evaluating surgical candidacy. So sometimes you get a patient transferred in and they have a tumor and they may have been told by another surgeon, this is not resectable, this is in your motor strip. And so again, mapping things out. So you can see that if you map this out, the cortical spinal tract looks like it's is anterior, and then you can confirm that with intraoperative monitoring as well. And then here's another example. So this is a brain metastasis when some people may argue, this person was densely hemiparetic, and some people may think, okay, I'm going to just give them radiation. I tend to be a little bit more aggressive. If you have a neurological deficit, I feel, and you have all this edema, I feel like radiation just is very, very slow, and you're just limping around for like months. And I guess I like open surgery over radiosurgery. Sorry to the people who are radiosurgery folks. So for this person, I'm like, if I can make you walk again, I'm gonna take you to surgery. So here, looking at that picture statically, you're gonna say, oh, maybe that's not safe. But then you map it out, you're like, oh, actually this is gonna be safe. And this came to the surface, and again, got a good resection. Their edema resolved faster. They're walking earlier. They're not just lingering around waiting for radiation to work for like 2 months. And then integration with other platforms. So sometimes you're not necessarily doing open surgery. You may be doing laser ablation. And this is also really important. So some of the really good work from Washington University, St. Louis, if you are familiar with laser ablation, there are different treatment dose therapy lines, so the TDT lines, and white means it's really, really dead, but then there's blue and yellow, and the question is, if I get the heat really close to some fibers, is it okay? Like, which treatment dose line, how close can I get to these fibers? And it's important to know that. And you can actually upload connectome data into your laser ablation workflow. So then you can start actually thinking about, okay, well, how far can I push this ablation without disrupting things? And so this is one of the first patients done where we used Connectomics in combination with laser ablation. And so again, we started in 2022. I think some things about implementation is having continuing to work with the MRI department, because a lot of times with protocols, they may forget to send the correct type of imaging, and then communication with PACS. So you have to have kind of interval check-ins to make sure those processes are working well, providing resident education, and then having grand rounds lectures. We had Dr. Hampt come and visit us and show us like what work he was doing, just to reiterate, you know, this is what people in the field are doing, and this is how it's helpful. And then the other thing is leveraging the technology to improve visibility, advertising that, hey, we have this new brain mapping technology, this is how it works, advertising to referring physicians, etc. And then almost every year, I go through the process of getting this approved by the budget. So thank you for Omniscient for helping. So this is when we started to look at some data of our early experience of saying, okay, we are getting incremental cases that are increasing, and starting to look at those patients that were billed as non-operative, but then converted to operative based off of their mapping. And then also really tracking our neurodeficit rates. So then going from decreasing length of stay. So we typically do not put people in the ICU post-op. So we put all our patients on the floor unless there's something unusual, even posterior fossa cases. But still, decreasing the length of stay is still very important. And that translates to cost. So in the end, showing this to the boardroom, as one of the first speaker highlighted, that you have to actually advocate for this technology and saying, okay, yes, this costs however much money for the subscription, but this is how we're estimating that we're actually making a profit for you. Because again, the way the hospital sees this technology is a little differently than you. So in the end, then summary, the lessons learned, definitely helping you decide when you can maybe push the boundaries, like in terms of maybe I will go for the resection, and feeling a little bit more secure. Awake craniotomies, I do much less awake craniotomies. That also translates to money, because OR time is money. So the shorter your cases are, the better. I still have not found an awake craniotomy protocol that is short. It's a huge setup, and you have people in the room and talking to the patient. It just takes so much longer. So you're cutting down hours of time. We also did present that to the budget of how many awake craniotomies we used to do versus now, and how that translates into, again, saved money. And then thinking about how this can be extended beyond tumor. Our next phase is thinking about using resting state functional MRI for our brain injury patients for prognostication, because sometimes they linger in the ICU and it's really difficult to have those talks with people about, hey, is this person ever going to wake up? Are they going to have a meaningful recovery? Or we should not do the trach and peg. So I think that's what we're very much interested in at our center. That's the next phase. But there are other capabilities such as neuropsych, AVMs, cavernomas. Obviously, the work from Miami with the skull-based tumors, just very amazing stuff coming out. And again, trying to show the health system's value for when you go to those boardrooms. And lastly, just in the end, I think it just helps you in terms of increase your surgical volume and improve your outcomes. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. I think, there's a couple of, again, additional points to bring out of that talk. So one thing is it's really important to gain more and more data pre and post-operatively if we're going to understand how to use these data. And so I'm always been a firm believer of same way every time. It helps your staff, it helps everybody. But I think gaining more of these scans, so obviously there's an omniscient protocol that we have to utilize in order to kind of get some preoperative imaging that we can load into the system. But if we really want to understand the functional outcomes and how it correlates with disruptions to connectomics, to functional networks, it behooves us actually to start getting these kind of protocol scans before and after these surgeries to some degree, no matter what we do. And that has definitely been the practice we have begun to implement in Colorado, which is I want to see the disruptions to the networks before and after surgery, kind of whether I'm using these networks to guide my surgery or not. And also it gets the team used to seeing these kinds of protocols throughout. So I think this is really important, and I think it lends itself to some of the talks you've heard, and including the last one. There's, again, this is a technology that really right now is in its infancy, and there's just so much data that can be gained from this as we start to learn how to use it and understand the thresholds for disruptions to function and whether or not we can avoid things like awake surgeries, because actually at the end of the day, this predicts functional outcome better or allows us to essentially plot a surgical trajectory that means we don't need to do an awake surgery. So these are really important points. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Michael Chagru. And I think, there he is, yeah. So, and by the way, I think it's very important for you to look down if you're sitting at a table right now at the sheet in front of you and realize that very few people are able to pull off the surgical cap glamour shot in the way that Mike Chagru is able to do. So congratulations. I hear you bought this sports coat for the meeting. Thank you so much. So I've known Mike for a while. He's a phenomenal guy. He's really the key architect of all of this. So he's a neurosurgeon at Stanford Health in Connecticut. During his time in Australia is really when he brought a lot of this to bear. He's an internationally recognized expert and pioneer in the clinical application of connectomics. And he's really the author on a lot of the papers that you'll see in the literature. And he is just super smart when it comes to this stuff, as you're about to see. And despite that, he's going to really try to limit his talk to 20 minutes. As a CMO and co-founder of Omniscient Neurotechnology, he bridges the gap between complex neuroscientific data and actionable clinical workflows. He now has more than 300 peer-reviewed papers, many of which really are focused on connectomics. And I think you're about to learn a ton from what he has to say. So great to have you, Mike.
So, it's really great to see how big this meeting got. For those of you who actually don't know where the word Connectomic Circle came from, it came from the first time we decided to have an educational meeting during COVID. And we said, well, let's have everyone present cases. And we realized, well, no one had ever used the technology before. So how was anyone going to give a symposium on how to use it? So we just said, well, let's have everyone just stand in a circle and talk to each other. And that's where the word Connectomic Circle came from. It was 8 people on a Zoom call during COVID. So it's amazing to see how much bigger it's gotten. I think ultimately, it's also another piece of history is why we called the company Omniscient. And ultimately, the mission of this whole thing was that we really don't understand the brain very well. And patients get hurt when we don't understand the brain very well. And what we really wanted to focus on is being a knowledge company. And first and foremost, if you don't have a good map of the brain and you don't know what's happening in the brain, it's hard to make good decisions. But one of the other things we started thinking about is how do we organize brain knowledge in a way that's actionable? And ultimately, in the midst of all of this, there's been an AI explosion. And I think if anyone who says they know where this is going, I would say they probably don't. But I'm, of course, going to step out there and give some ideas of what we're doing and how we're thinking about how this platform is going to evolve over the next few years. And ultimately, what I would argue is that we're really trying to do something useful for neurosurgeons, because the concept behind AI that people are approaching from the Silicon Valley angle, I think, is the wrong angle, at least for what we're doing for neurosurgery and neurological care more broadly. So I go to medical school when these chatbots are going to do our job in the next 3 to 4 years. Now, if I had a bunch of big stake in one of those securities, I want everyone to think that I could destroy the world with my technology and then raise capital on that. But the issue is this. Ultimately, they're always founded on human knowledge, right? So if they're mining all the world's data, how can they actually do better than us? And the answer is they can't. They might be more effective at not making mistakes, but humans aren't good at this particular problem. If it was, we would have had treatments for all these other diseases we have. And I would argue we're not even that good at shunts. I mean, anyone who has a good solution to not have those things fail, please let me know. I would be happy to buy your product. So what we're really trying to get at is actually something really different, is how do you go look into the black box and organize the information in a way that's actually, we start to learn and dig into the things that we don't know. Because we're never going to make progress if we don't do this. But ultimately, the issue is this. We don't understand the brain. It's not because we haven't studied it. It's because the brain is vast and complicated with lots and lots of stuff happening in it. There's a lot of connections, and how connection problems lead to symptom problems are not well understood and highly complex. So ultimately, we've been studying this problem for a long time, we meaning the greater neuroscientific community. So if you haven't looked this up, which I have, there are 500,000 papers about some aspect of connectomics. That's pretty amazing. There's I think $900 million, something like this, in the NIH budget just for resting state fMRI alone. Yeah, we're the first people to actually get that cleared for anything that I'm aware of. And that took me 12 hours of arguing with the FDA. Part of the issue is that this is not a scientific thing anymore. We know what these things, what you can do with high-level imaging. Probably most people are at institutions where there's at least one person, if not multiple people, who are really knowledgeable. The challenge is not, is there something on an imaging study that will tell us something useful? We know that there is. It's logistics. So I don't claim to have all the answers to the human brain, but what I would say is that what we've really made our effort to focus on is how do we basically get that information into people's hands? And more importantly, if we know that fMRI and DTI, all this fancy imaging that everyone gets grants on and puts in their marketing material, et cetera, if we know that it's useful, why aren't we doing it on everyone? And we all know the answer, anyone who works in hospitals, is that hospitals are difficult places to work. Getting things done at scale is challenging. And if you don't know how to function inside of our ecosystems with our demands, which is people who show up on Sunday night and need surgery Monday morning, if we can't work at that level of demands, then we're not going to actually accomplish anything. One of the things we try to do as best we can is be able to actually service that kind of demand, because obviously I'm a neurosurgeon, I know what it's like to work in a hospital. And we have to be able to meet the kind of demand at the scale of the kind of patients we treat, which are sick and come in high volumes at weird times of the day. So once we started working out with QuickTome, as we said, this is a really, really complex piece of data. It's a lot of data in here, and we've constantly been trying to figure out how do we make this easier to work with. And so what we basically started to do is and this is coming, this isn't in the software right now, so I don't want to portray that it is, but try to get agentic capabilities. Say, is this in the motor cortex? Right now, we don't want people to become QuickTomeologists. We want to be people who are neurosurgeons who use QuickTome. And that's tough. Building good products that do this in a useful way is difficult. But you can start to see that as we start to interlink some of these components, we can start to say, show me the corticospinal tract. Eventually, we want it to be voice commands, but most hospitals won't let us do this. But really how do we put generative AI to the side of our tool to actually make it a knowledge tool? Okay, that's a cool trick. And of course, we could just make that be the product launch. But some people know who that guy is, the older people in the room. His name's Tim Mapstone. He was my chair at Oklahoma when I was a junior faculty. And I want to give credit where credit's due, because this was his idea, not QuickTome in general, but just the concept I'm about to talk about after this. And one of the things he said was, I was talking to him about, research, and I said, I think it's maybe hard with the team that we have here. At one point, we only had 4 faculty and no research people to go get an NIH grant. I just don't think we have the great thing. And he said, well, we have this wonderful neurological lab down the street. It's called the Neuro ICU, and we don't study anyone in it. If we did, we would actually probably change the field. My God, I hate Macintosh so much. Okay. So if you start to think about it, right, as we start to think about funding getting more tight, right, I don't know what we're funding at now, but last time I heard it was 11 percentile, right? So that's pretty difficult to get an NIH grant. And the NIH is funding things that are sexy, not things that actually are useful all the time, okay? We spend $900,000 on fMRI, and I had to go argue to get it into the hands of real clinicians. Not trying to cast aspersion, that's just a fact. So the problem is, this is how we've been doing research. We have this building where there's tons and tons of neurologic disease. We then select out a small number of people to go to our research study. We spend $1 million doing whatever, and what happens is we throw away all the rest of the data. This is ridiculous. I hate Macintosh so much I cannot even describe it right now. Okay, so we throw away most of the data. We don't study it. And we all know why we don't study it, because there's all these rules, all this IT infrastructure, and even if we wanted to do these kind of studies, we'd have to go get a grant, or find something in the budget, hire this army of people to do all this neuropsych testing, and then we'd have to go mine data of Epic, which is full of garbage and noise. We know that, right? So the question is, why isn't this the problem we're trying to tackle? This is the problem that really matters, right? And this has real world consequences. So this is actually my wife, this lovely tiny Thai woman, with Brian McKnight, who is a Grammy Award winner. And basically I said, should we be randomizing these 2 people against each other? No, we should not. Because not only do they have different life experiences, speak different languages, different sizes, they have different genomics. But that's how we do our trials, right? This is how we do trials. We basically take people with different connectomes, different genomes, we put them into a study, and this is what we're actually studying, right? And then we wonder why, when we take things into phase 3 or all these other studies, where we look at things, we're underpowered and we're heterogeneous. So the reality is, as much as people have really bought into this concept that we have to have class 1 evidence, are we really doing evidence-based medicine when we randomize these people against each other? That's nuts. That's completely crazy. What we need to be doing is actually building rational trial designs, so we're comparing people like this. Now this sounds great, everyone's talked about this, I've sat in hundreds of meetings about this. But the reality is, if we wanted to do this, this is a lot of money and difficult to do. And ultimately, the problem is really difficult. So this is unpublished data. We did this. And what we were looking at as a GBM cohort, we had all the things you'd care about, at least the major stuff. So IDH1, extended resection, very good data set, third party, and we had connectome data. And what we were looking at was, if you look at the training set, the red line would be what would it take to randomize away the heterogeneity of the connectome if you didn't pay attention to that in your glioblastoma set and its prediction on survival. The answer is about 2,200 people per arm. So we're not doing anything like that. And we shouldn't be doing studies, that's too expensive. Pharma's never gonna fund that. That's a problem. And of course, we can talk about this and say, this is a problem, we should do something about it, and then we go about and try to live in the world that we live in, right? And ultimately, though, there are really powerful tools out there that are used all the time to sell us advertising and sell us stuff on Amazon and all this other stuff, and it isn't really mattering on the things that matter. Why? Because they're not funded, right? If we don't put money behind it, we don't get behind it, we don't provide this in the real world, and we don't demand our hospitals to help us do research like this, then we're just gonna keep doing the same thing because it's too difficult. So what we really need to be able to do is to take this really, collection of patients, put them into a real world data set, compare them against each other, and make sure that the studies are clean. And so if you look at the middle group, we actually built a model of this. We're underpowered, I'll be honest. It's a really difficult problem. But the reality is, at the bare minimum, the machine learning can now identify a cohort of patients based on where the data tumor is in the connectome that is all going to be dead in a year, no matter what treatment arm they're in, regardless of their IDH status, regardless of extent of resection. In the green cohort, everyone's alive at 3 years. So, at the bare minimum, we shouldn't put them all in the same group together. Now, the question is, how do we do that at scale? And people have shown these kind of plots, which is great, because a long time ago I saw this and thought, boy, the answer's in there somewhere. But it's very big. So this is 144,000 pieces of data. This is what QuickTome's mining right now. And so one of the things we started thinking about is, how do we, if we want to turn our hospitals into data machines, and we really want to start mining data at scale and doing all this great stuff that we all know is possible, we have to be able to navigate the hospital ecosystem. We have to be in there. We have to all solve all the logistical problems we face every day. And more importantly, machine learning and tool and technology has made this much more realistic than it was 5 years ago. Now, we built a hypercluster. This doesn't look cool, but it is pretty cool. So to show you what all those lines are, that's the machine trying every single possible machine learning approach in about 35 minutes to maximize the AUC of the data. In the meantime, we've been publishing papers. I'm sure everyone basically has it sent directly to their phone every time I have something hit PubMed, so you're all aware of this. But we published about 45 different papers thinking about how to train models at scale. So we have this for ourselves. This is what we do in the background. We have about 120,000 brain MRIs. I think it's the biggest in the world. And really what we're trying to do is say, and this is actually something, I got this idea from Sean Grady, who when I first met him and told this idea, or what we were doing, he said, I have the greatest neuropsych department in the world and they can't get him to see anyone because there are just too many patients and not enough neuropsychologists. And I thought that's a big problem, right? So yeah, it's great if everyone can get a 12-hour neuropsych eval, but most of the patients can't do that. We don't have enough people. I think there's 120 board-certified neuropsychologists in the United States. So are they going to see everyone we treat? No, and everyone knows what the wait times are. So I would argue that it's probably better to get some data on everyone than no data on most people, and a few masterpieces on a few very select number of people. Again, we're missing most of the opportunities to learn. So if we start thinking about this whole thing, we started to build the tools and pipelines that we can start plugging into QuickTime. I'm not saying we're doing this next month, it's coming. But the first step is having the patient talk to the LLM first, making sure that they actually translate symptoms that they're talking about into actual brain mechanisms. That's really difficult. And it's not going to get done by ChatGPT, because what ChatGPT is going to do is basically take the same wrong way to do this that's polluting the internet literature and try to apply it onto that. So you have to have the right guardrails. You have to explain what does this mean exactly. And you have to have it think like a neurological specialist, not like the internet. Then it starts to basically determine which neuropsych test should you do. So instead of doing this big battery, a real experienced neuropsychologist focuses on some things and knows that if you can't pay attention or you're aphasic, don't give these other really complicated tests, right? It has to know how to do that and sequencing that. That's AI. That's what we're using LLMs for, something useful. But then it also starts to link to the brain analytics, knowing what parts of the brain to look at. Because again, once you translate symptoms and circuits, or symptoms and neuropsychological findings into circuits, it starts directing you to where you need to look. That's useful clinically, but it's also useful for getting data mining to scale, to know who this patient is. So a long time ago when we first founded the company, our first contract, we thought, oh man, it's going to be the Silicon Valley people, they say, get all the data you can from the hospitals, and all the hospitals think they're sitting on gold. And they're not. It's like having oil under your ground. If you're not a mining company, that oil isn't worth anything. We decided to say that ultimately an MRI doesn't mean anything if you don't know whose MRI it is. And getting the data out of Epic, we decided was a pollution. It was not a good use of our time. We have to have the data labeled correctly. And so we built a tool to do that at scale. But then finally, starting to link back. So we're not just doing a simple research tool, but linking and using LLMs for what they're actually good for. So ultimately, this is neurosurgical Gen AI. It isn't here to go become a doctor, because doctors suck at this process, right? If we were good at doing this, we would already be doing it. So if our goal is to go into our weak spot and try to replicate that, have at it. I don't know if that's going to move the goalpost. What we're trying to do is do something hard. But what we think is that we can actually begin to do that at scale and to turn this thing loose on an entire hospital at scale. So the eventual world we live in, and this is something that when my residents came to me, when I first got to Oklahoma, the residents didn't do research. And I came and had a meeting with them and I said, hey guys, research is important in neurosurgery. Why don't you guys do research? They say, oh, we're not interested in, research and academics. I go, well, then you're not interested in being a neurosurgeon, because what do we do that we're good at? Find the thing that we have great outcomes, 100%, not many things. And we do our best. Some of our patients do great, but it's a lot of improvement. And that improvement is only going to happen when we get to the kind of scale that Amazon has. So when we first started the company a few years ago, we talked to Amazon. And it's about a really crazy idea we had. And I won't go into all the details. If you're interested, I'm happy to tell you. But they said, how many scans you go? We go, oh, we've got 3,000 depression patients. It's the most anywhere out there. And they go, we don't really care about anything with less than 60,000. Okay? And so it was a big slap in the face, because I thought, we're the best. We have the most. And that's really what the AI that we're talking about is. So doing our 100-person little puddles is not going to move the goalpost. We need to get realistic here at what they talk about when they know what that really looks like. And we need to be at that scale. And if we're not at that scale, we're going to struggle, because our problem is exponentially bigger and more complex than their problem. So if we really want to move the goalpost, we ultimately need to go to where the sick people are and study this. And there's a really great paper by Fred Barker many years ago where he showed that if you show up for your phase 2 study at MGH, you already are not reflective of the natural history of the disease. Okay? So we're not studying the sickest people, we're studying the people who can show up to the trial. But when they go and show up to phase 3 or the real world, they're going to end up with my neuro-oncologist who wants everyone possible into a trial. And they're going to follow the rules and come up with ways to get the sick people into your trial. And that's the barrier that it has to clear. So if we really want to study this, we got to use our resources. And we have one of the best resources and research out there, which is our hospitals. We need to turn them loose, and the technology is coming soon to do that. And that's where I think QuickTome's going. Thanks, everyone.
For those of you in the room that understood that, it was really moving. I actually think that, Mike is truly a brilliant guy, and this stuff is, he's at the next level with thinking about how to incorporate this data, but the fact of the matter is that he's exactly right? So the scale of data in neurosurgery is tiny. It's a speck, and it's going to be hard to make meaningful decisions based on data sets that are too small. And Connectomics and the data that we're starting to get, and really it's the tip of the iceberg, I would say, that we're just starting to get, is going to change the way we think about neurosurgery and the way we think about disease and neurological disease. But it's just beginning. I think to get to the scale you're talking about, Mike, it's going to take a bit. But it sounds like you guys have some ideas already that are really getting us to larger pools of data in hospitals and networks. And that's tremendous, right? Because we're not going to move the needle on neurosurgery and outcomes until we have access to much larger pools of data. And Mike and this team have really, I think, in a way that nobody has, started to think about that. And I think that's really crucial and important. So really fantastic talk and really inspiring for what's coming down the pipe in neurosurgery and in Connectomics.